morning, everyone. Thanks for having us here today. I wanted to touch on a couple topics today. We're with a company called Transparency One. We provide source-to-store compliant management technology for large brands, and we've partnered with SGS to provide a comprehensive solution for supply chain transparency. And I wanted to offer a couple thoughts this morning, first of which is just to define the concept of supply chain transparency, second of which is to talk about the application with FSMA, and third of which is to challenge a bit the thinking of how FSMA is really part of a larger initiative, as Mike said as well, of being able to communicate your brand story to consumers. So with that, as Mike pointed out, I think aptly, we're in an interesting trend right now, and obviously food safety is a big part of it, but it's not the only part of, over the past 40 years, of rising concern with consumers with the global supply chain across food safety, across sustainability, across social responsibility as well, which has led to obviously a lot of the regulations that exist today globally. But in addition, we have consumers who are now far more health conscious and socially connected as well through social media. So we have this interesting dynamic with heightened consumer concern and a very connected economy. And consumers are asking new questions. I have a 10-year-old and 12-year-old boys, and they ask me these questions now, which I don't think I would have asked when I was 10 or 12, which are questions like, who's producing the products that I'm buying? Where are they coming from? Are they safe? And are they produced in line with my values? And so consumers are very much thinking about things differently than they had a decade ago, 2 decades ago, and even more so, I think, with millennials on a global basis. I would challenge a bit that when we think about supply chain transparency, we often focus on risk, and we focus on reducing risk in the supply chain, reducing risk of safety issues or social responsibility issues. I would challenge a bit that this also represents an opportunity. It represents an opportunity to communicate a different story to your consumer, a different story around your brand and around your supply chain. And I think we're seeing that, and I'll touch on some of these case studies, happening very quickly. I think for some of the first times, we're experiencing situations where we have food safety and marketing in the same room together, talking about how they communicate the story of the product through marketing to the end consumer. If you think about where transparency really is focused on, you can think of it as an iceberg. We all have good visibility at that top level in our supply chain, but it really comes down to what's below the first tier. What's happening in my tier 2, my tier 3, tier 4? Who are these companies? Where are they located? What sort of certifications do they have? What are their practices? And when we define the concept of transparency, we simply want to say, we want to know what's below the surface. And whether that means going to the farm or whether that means stopping at the second or third tier, what's important is that we're driving below the top of the iceberg to really understand the supply chain better. And it's a journey. No one flips a switch and has full visibility overnight. There's a lot of statistics out there in the market today, and I would use these not to argue about the facts, which is always an interesting topic in the US these days, but I would just argue about the kind of the point-counterpoint with this, is that we've seen, unfortunately, with brands taking over a year to recover from food safety issues, dramatic issues with the brand risk and brand value. But at the same time, many statistics out there report that consumers would switch to a new brand if they offered full product transparency. And in this case, with this study, it was 40%. Lots of different statistics out there. These aren't ours. These are ones available in the market. But you have a situation where you're having to understand the risk of the business, but at the same time, consumers are asking for the same information. So this is this risk-opportunity idea. Same thing, obviously, on the social responsibility side. Again, this was from FAO. They report 100 million children are victims of child labor in the agriculture sector. But at the same time, Nielsen reports that 91% of consumers would be more loyal to a company that supports a social or environmental issue. We're talking about the same information. Helping to resolve the issue around social responsibility is the same information consumers are looking for with their buying purchases as well. So when we think about source-to-store risk management, what are we really talking about? What's the definition? From our perspective, it's really about understanding below that first tier in the supply chain. It doesn't mean necessarily having to understand the complete supply chain, but certainly for those sensitive ingredients that everyone's managing, having an ability to go down to the farm if required. So we define it as having the ability to map the supply chain from farm to fork, knowing all suppliers, ingredients, and facilities, being able to capture facility and product certifications, capture the ingredient country of origin, particular focus on sensitive ingredients, coffee, rice, seafood, and being able to react very quickly to crisis. There's a lot of data out there. You have a lot of data. Associations have a lot of data. How do we start to combine that in a way that we can connect the dots across the supply chain? But this is the way that we define the problem. The question that we always are asked is, where do I start? And this is obviously related to how we start to look at this from a FSMA perspective. But it's, again, difficult to turn a switch and have complete supply chain transparency. So what we really focus on with our clients is the breadth and depth of the supply chain. What are the most critical issues that they're facing? Is it a food safety issue? Is it a social responsibility issue? Is it a sustainability issue? What countries are most critical to manage those issues? What ingredients are most critical? And then what are the outputs? Are we using this to communicate for consumers? Are we using this for sustainability reporting? Are we using this to support FSMA initiatives? But this type of thinking, I would suggest this morning, is a good way to start to think about how to progress on the journey with supply chain transparency. So how do we apply this to FSMA? Again, it's just solutions like this do not solve the FSMA. They do not provide FSMA for you. They do not provide compliance, but they are a piece of it. And specifically the areas that we see the biggest application are understanding, obviously, the connections in the supply chain, being able to map particularly foreign suppliers, knowing the connection, multiple countries outside of the US, assuring that your suppliers respect your standards, that you have a document trail, that you have an audit trail of what's happening, and assuring that as your supply chains change, that you have up-to-date information being reported from your supply chain, and then being able to use that to support the initiatives that Hank talked about in the beginning as well. So to make it a bit real, just to put a visual behind this, one of the key points, number one, is really to be able to map a supply chain, and if I drill in here a little bit, is having that ability to understand both for products, facilities, and suppliers how the supply chain is created. So what products are being provided by what facilities and what suppliers in what countries, and having that ability to go up and down and across the supply chain as needed. Critical point number one. Critical point number two is being able to look down through the supply chain and on any certification or any standard that you're looking for, track that journey. So how am I doing for my facilities? How am I doing that for my Tier 1 facilities? And how am I looking at for my Tier 2 and below? And being able to actually go investigate that information. But this isn't a one-time effort. It's an ongoing journey to really be able to keep the supply chain in a visible and controllable way. And the last point I would leave with you as well is that we clearly are seeing a very interesting trend happening today, as I pointed out in the beginning, where the marketing groups are very much trying to drive new stories for consumers, new stories about transparency and authenticity of the brand. And I think I would challenge as a group that we could start to look at what are some of the best practices that we could use to take the information that we all capture today in our respective worlds and being able to communicate that to consumers. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to communicate everything, but what's most critical? And we just recently started a project with a major brand in this area, and we'll keep you obviously posted on what's happening, but it's a great dynamic to see within the industry. So with that, I will turn it over to Nicola. Thanks.